And this is Real Estate Underground.
Greetings and salutations, Real Estate Undergrounders. Here it's Ed Matthews with the Real Estate Underground podcast. Today is, once again, we're very fortunate with the guest that we have invited on, Mr. Tony Torres of COR13 Capital. I'm going to let him tell his story. But one of the things that I've learned about your business is that you are, well, actually a chunk of your business at least is built to rent. So we're going to dig into quite a bit of that because I'm absolutely fascinated by the business model. And my friend Margaret Kozlark of Noblevest had put a bug in my ear about that about a week ago. And I've been doing nothing but homework about it ever since. So Tony, welcome to the show and thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Ed. I really appreciate it. It's really cool that you know Margaret because I spoke with her this morning.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I did. She is a blessing of a human being. We actually worked together on the Eagle Rock Diversification Fund. So she and I.
All right.
So
she and I.
Yeah. So Margaret, she is an amazing person.
She really is.
She's been nothing but a true pleasure to work with, and I'm excited. I have a greater phone call coming up with her next week. So
yeah, and her partner Christine is just as amazing. So
Christine's awesome.
Yeah, she's fantastic. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I met the two of them probably about 6 months ago, and they rapidly became two of my favorite human beings on the planet. So
I could not agree more.
Right
Couldn't
on.
agree more.
Okay, so that ends the Noblevest commercial here on the Real Estate Underground. So Tony, welcome to the show. For those of us who may not know about COR13 and what you do, why don't you tell us all about your business and then we can get into it.
Happy to. Thanks for having me, Ed. So COR13 Capital it's a real estate investment company, just like all the other ones that you see out there from so many of the great people that we know in this industry. Yep. The difference is that COR13's mission is not to retire. It's not just financial freedom. It's not putting as much money away as possible, but it's actually making a difference and using real estate to do it.
Awesome.
I look at the real estate market today, and I think over the past 3 to 5 years, we've really lost who we are as human beings, and that we not only do we get to do real estate, like we have to change the paradigm in our mind that we are doing real estate and it's the only way to financial freedom, but we really get to do real estate. What a blessing that is.
Right.
And then you really have two inflection points that you can use it for your own pocket, and you're just thinking about yourself or your own interest or maybe a small group's interest, or the impact that you can have with it. I know that when I drive downtown here in Greenville, or when I just go to any city, I look all over the place, I see housing and buildings and everything, and I just think about the massive impact that just 1% of that could make on changing people's lives. Absolutely. In a different direction that you could go. So yeah, that's really the mentality and the idea that we had when we created COR13 Capital. I'm a Christian in my faith, and I try to keep the book of Ecclesiastes really close to me. It really talks about how this world is vanity, and everything that is on this earth today will stay, and we will go one day. We don't stay here. All the houses, the money, everything that's here stays here. But the great thing about it is the impact that we can have using all of that stuff while we are here. Right. So that's really what we're about here. And that's what we seek to be about in our build to rent communities as well.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So, one of the things that I'm interested in. So, obviously multifamily, there's a whole bunch of sub asset classes within this space. I tend to deal with, apartment buildings. Obviously build to rent is a place where I've actually been looking in earnest, literally the last 7 days, to educate myself on. So it's actually advantageous and probably kismet that you and I are meeting right now, right in the middle of as I'm trying to figure this out. So, so as far as build to rent, what does that mean in terms of your business model, and how does that operate in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. So build to rent is really no different than multifamily. The difference, as its structure, right. The biggest difference that build to rent and multifamily is really just the look of it.
Right.
We have all the amenities. We operate it just like a multifamily build. So if you have a 150 unit apartment complex, it's got a pool, property management, It's got a back end operating crew that has asset management. It's got maintenance, all that.
Right.
Our build to rents operate the same exact way. There's no difference. The only difference is that ours will all be gated. So that is it's a safety aspect. And when you add safety, that is a $20,000 NOI booster, like no tomorrow. So our build to rents are meant to be really intimate, family oriented, horizontal multifamily. That's how you can think of them. The difference is that when you acquire multifamily versus when you build multifamily, it's where we can realize what I like to call the cost to value gap.
Okay.
Building multifamily or build to rent, either way, is generally speaking, overwhelmingly the majority of the time going to make you more money. So you have to realize, do you want your cash flow today that is going to get diluted by the amount that it costs to buy the asset? Right. Or do you want your cash flow later that is going to be an equity boost from buying land and turning it into a Class A, great asset? So that's the real difference. That's what I learned early on, was that I wanted to do that. And I would forego today's cash flow for tomorrow's higher value.
Right. Okay.
So that's really the difference.
Okay. And so where I'm, one of the things I'm considering is we're I can't really talk about it publicly, but we're contemplating building I'm searching for the words that I can actually use. So we have a project where we would build hypothetically, then we'll do this hypothetically, a 20 unit building on a particular parcel, rent that, stabilize it, and then, build the next 20 unit, and then the next 20 unit, and then the next 20 unit. Right.
Yep.
So in terms of, and I look at that more as development, and I somehow in my mind draw a line between development and build to rent. Right. Whereas, because build to rent is more, at least my understanding of it is like duplexes and triplexes that are really set as, yes, they're connected, but they're actually, more homes that, have lawns and backyards and, patios and all that. So can you tell me a little bit about that from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So our build to rents are all single family. So the best way that I like to describe what build to rent is just a simple equation of multifamily plus single family equals build to rent.
Right.
And all of our assets will be single family. They'll be 1 and 2 stories high. They'll have their own private backyards. Some of them in the premium location will have a bigger backyard.
Yep.
That's really it. So development, it is what it is. You would be developing an asset. There's really no difference.
Sure.
So essentially you can look at it as a builder, like a Ryan Holmes or any of the institutional builders. Yep. They build single family neighborhood subdivisions. That's exactly what we do. But we just do it on a grand rental scale instead of a for sale asset. So there's really no difference between building a multifamily development and building a build to rent development, except for the actual physical asset that's sitting there.
And the yield that you get in terms of units per acre, right, is obviously different.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Your density will be a little bit different, and obviously in a multifamily, purposefully. In a multifamily asset, when you can stack 4 of them on top of each other, you can get a higher density per acre than we can in build to rent.
Sure.
The real difference is that it goes back to what we've talked about previously, is your consumer base. What would Jane and John rather live in with their 2 kids and a family? You know what I'm saying? What would they rather live in?
Right.
And when you can think of, if I can charge, say, a $200 to $300 rent premium, but it's their safety and they want to pay that because it's a gated community, gets all the amenities, and it's a single family home. Right. Why would we not provide that?
Right.
That's a fantastic opportunity for less money up front. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, in terms of the business model itself, right, obviously you're building, so, repair and maintenance is minimal to almost zero for the first several years, which is a huge win for the property owner, right?
Absolutely.
It's a win for the folks that live there because everything's brand new. So they're happy about that, right?
Absolutely.
Nothing to fix. No honey-do lists. How about that?
No honey-do
I wouldn't know what to do with my weekends. I got to tell you. I might actually take up fishing or golf or something. You never know.
Absolutely.
Right. And the other thing I'm curious about is vacancies, right? So, when, at least in my experience, I own a couple of single family homes, and, the thing that I've found is that, and this is anecdotal, but it also is backed up by market data, folks, when they rent a single family home, they tend to stay a lot longer than an
Absolutely.
apartment, right? And so what's your experience in terms of length of tenancy and, some of the other advantages that you see in build to rent?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So historically, residents that live in a build to rent single family home, they stay for an average of 15 months longer than they do in a multifamily asset.
Wow.
For obvious reasons. But I think a lot of that has to do with the current climate we're in as well. It's cheaper to rent. You can rent a $300,000 house for cheaper than you could buy a $200,000 house right now.
True statement.
I mean, when you think about those numbers, that is a massive delta. I mean, you're talking about $100,000 delta rent premium that you can get on a more expensive house, and you can appeal to the renter that way.
Right.
The other thing that I would say is that when you do a new build, your stability and your break-even point is a lot lower than when you do an acquisition. You don't need to hit 94% occupancy to hit your stability point,
right?
Because your cost, it's based on cost, not based on value.
Right.
So your threshold of break-even is a lot lower, which means you hit profit a lot sooner.
Right. And
so that's
yeah.
Good.
No, that's a what? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I'm curious.
So that's just another. I'm sorry, man. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, finish your point. It's okay.
So that's another good benefit to when you're doing ground up, is that your break even, your stability point is a lot lower than what you would have to achieve in an acquisition that you're going to end up taking out more debt on. Your LTV is going to be a lot lower than what we can get from an LTC basis.
Right.
It's just a better fitting glove for the investor looking for a long-term play.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me as well. So as far as appreciation goes, right, valuations. So how does a build to rent community, how do you value that? Do you value it as one asset, or do you value it as, 20 different single family homes? How does a bank look at this really? That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. I'm so glad you brought that up. There's really multiple exit strategies. I'll start with that point. There's multiple exit strategies because two of our builds in our Louisiana area are going to be subdivided. So one of them is 241 units, and it's going to be 241 lots. Our other one in Lafayette is 98 units. That'll be 98 lots. But our Foley asset in Foley, Alabama is 158 units on one big asset. One piece of land, 158 units on it.
Wow.
So the bank is going to look at this as one asset.
Okay.
The difference is that the exit strategy is based on what we decide we want to do. Is it beneficial that if we want to break off 20 units and sell it to a retail investor, we have that opportunity? If we wanted to sell the entire asset to, say, an institution, we have that option. That's another, just another benefit to the build to rent model, is that you have many exit strategies that you can go with.
Yeah.
Sometimes your business plan might be that you want to sell off half of your portfolio to put more money into another asset that you're going to build. That's an option.
Right.
Obviously, if it's sitting on one tax map, you're not going to be able to do that. But there's also tax advantages to having it on one big parcel. The entire valuation is taken in as the sum of all of its parts, where if you have it subdivided, the tax code looks a little bit different because it is subdivided.
Sure.
So from a lending perspective, to get back to your question, things in development are based on a loan to cost perspective. So that's always going to be a bit cheaper than if you were to go based off of value.
Right.
One of the biggest metrics that we have in development is yield on cost. And every build that we do, we aim for a 7 to 10% yield on cost. So what that translates to in numbers, I apologize for the ambulance going by.
It's all good.
What that translates to in numbers is if our project costs $32 million total cost, that includes debt and equity.
Right.
We're looking for a yield on cost to get to 40 to 45 million. that's what our goal is. So conservatively, we're looking for that in disposition as our exit in
Right.
5 to 7 years.
Okay. All right. And so I'm just curious, how did you get into this business? It's such a unique part of this business.
Yeah, so that is a great question. You're actually the third person today that's asked me that question.
Really?
When I was in college, I was studying healthcare finance, and I really just made a pivot. I wanted to go into real estate as the climate was changing. Went and worked for Zillow for about a year, and really just decided, that I wanted to start investing on my own. I was going to do single family. Really didn't see the scale factor in that. It's not a bad place to be. You can make some good money in single family.
Sure can,
but
it's hard.
It's tough to scale until you get to about 100 units.
Right.
After that, I started looking at different asset classes. Originally, I was going to try triple net lease. I was going to try industrial. I was going to do self-storage because I didn't want to deal with residents.
Right.
But then multifamily, someone put me on to multifamily. And then I started just doing some research. I started reading books and started learning about all kinds of, acquisition cost and loan to value. I learned, I read an entire, it wasn't a book. It was just a study on loan to value and how banks look at that from a lending perspective. And I realized you're going to pay a lot more money for it. And your equity percentage, when you go to an acquisition, if Ed comes and invests with me, your equity is diluted on an acquisition compared to a development.
Correct.
So I reached out to a great buddy of mine, who's a developer in South Dakota. And I asked him just some questions. He spent probably 2-3 hours on the phone with me, just answering everything. And a lot of it went right over my head. I had no idea what he was talking about. But I told him, and I was just straight with him. I said, look, this is what I want to do. I want to build. I want to take stuff from ground to riches. I just wanted, I want to put less money in up front to be able to create the value in 3 to 5 years.
Yep.
And I asked him, would he be my mentor? And he said, I'll mentor you and I'll do it for free, but I'm not going to do any of the work. And I asked him, I was like, what do you mean? He said, you can come to me with any question, any time of day, anything, and I'll tell you what to do, but you're going to do it. I said, okay, fine.
It's a good deal.
We started looking. Oh yeah, it's a great deal. So we started looking at different pieces of land, and I said, okay, I've got a piece of land. What do I need to do? I want to see all this. He said, you need to go here, here, and here, just to keep it easy. So I called all these people. I called the city. I called the tax code, the tax office. I called the zoning department. I would call all these people until I got comfortable with calling them to get all this information. And I started learning that way. And I just kept on reading and reading. And I realized that, just really quickly that development is going to be the way that, number one, most people are not going to go. Most people are not going to want to go take a piece of dirt and turn it to riches because it's seeming to be more risky.
It's daunting.
But it is. But I over time, I just started seeing it as just as daunting, if not less daunting, than buying a $50 million asset that costs $25 million to build. I just don't see it. I just see it just as daunting.
Right.
So I started just networking with people and because of my real estate background, I just started putting myself out there and I said, this is what I want to do. I came on board with a group called Legacy Acquisitions.
Yep.
And Andy McMullen, I don't know if you know who he is, but great saint of a man. And he wanted to bring me on in the group as the director of development. And here we go. So now we've got 3 build to rents going, and we're trying to scale up to get another 3 or 4 in the Greenville market, and then get some out in Texas as well. And we're just really wanting to take this by storm. And our group is just so focused on this and so great at what we do. And we partner with a builder that has 30 years in this industry doing such great work. And we're just lighting it up and getting after it, man.
Amazing. Yeah. Congratulations on your success.
I appreciate it.
So as far as the target market, so you mentioned Texas, I heard you say Greenville. What do you look for when you're starting to look at a potential market? What are the, 8 or 10 things that you are looking at to figure out if that's a market that's worth, investing time in to find the land?
Absolutely. So obviously there's 3 or 4 things that are low hanging fruit. I mean, you think about economic development, scalability. Like, you have to think, is the market really condensed to where it's a great market? It's got a huge GDP. I mean, it just brings in a lot of revenue, but you can't really expand beyond the city center.
Yeah.
That's one. Texas, you can go out as far as you want and you're good.
Yeah. Land for days.
Oh yeah. I think about local demographics. I think about, what is this place predominantly homeowners, because the market hasn't really made it to where homes aren't affordable.
Right.
I look at topography. Am I limited in my expanse? Florida, for example, is a market that you're limited in your expanse on 3 sides, obviously.
Right.
So you can't just keep going out, as we were talking about. So the land becomes more expensive because you're really limited on your accessibility.
Yep.
I look at the local business journals. Like, what is it? Where does the city want to go? And what do they want to see? Because I'm a firm believer, Ed, give consumers and the people in the community what they want. Don't give them what you want, because all you're going to do is make them mad.
Right.
If you give them what they want, you'll always reap the benefit of that.
Without a doubt.
It's like we were talking about. It's like we were talking about an hour ago. Build to rent is single family plus multifamily.
Right.
That's what it is. If you take Jane and John, ask them where they want to live, they're probably going to say they want to live in a house.
Yep.
Why not build them a house then? Build them a house. There you go. And they will happily pay for it. Right. So it's those things. I look for restaurants. I look for, what is the vibe in the town? Is it a dead town where people don't even want to be around there, where people are wanting to, migrate out? Is it
fun, right? All that.
Yeah. Is it an incubator? Just many, many different things. I usually look to local business journals to find a lot of that.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can learn when you read the local paper and the city's 10-year plan, right?
Absolutely.
And not only does it give you a feel for where the city's going, where the leadership wants to take them, and they're elected, so you assume that what they want to do resonates with the population, but then you can validate it with the local paper, right? And the other thing is, it's amazing, absolutely amazing what you'll learn when you go to the local downtown diner, sit at the counter and have a cup of coffee and ask questions. It's amazing what you will learn.
Absolutely. You want to know what the community wants? Go find a 25-year-old in the community and ask them where they hang out, and ask them what they like to do. You will find more out in about 5 questions than you will by reading anything.
So true.
Absolutely.
Yep. And so, okay, so you pick a market, and what does the target profile look like in terms of land? Do you have like a minimum, number of acreage that you're looking for? How does that work in your business?
So we look for really 2 things when we're looking at something at a very, high level. We look for acreage. So we want 25 units or more, or 25 acres or more.
Okay.
And then we also want to see the density factor. So if you have 25 acres, but the city says you're residential and you can only put 4 units per acre, well, that doesn't achieve density. So we need to be able to have 25 acres or more, and then be able to put 8 to 10 units per acre on that.
Okay. That's
what we ideally look for. Topography can be a little bit of a challenge. If you've got topography that slopes from the back to the front, you're obviously going to have some water issues. So it doesn't take it out of the equation, but
you got to maximize where you're high and dry. I get it.
Exactly. One of the biggest things that we look for is utility rights. Can we get the will serve from the utility providers in the area that they'll serve our asset? One big challenge is sewer in a lot of these places. So people look for, they'll get like a 50-acre piece of land, but there's no sewer there.
Right.
Well, to get public water, you're going to have to get water and sewer out there, and sewer is about $1 million every 10th of a mile in some places. So, I mean, you're talking a lot of money in some places. Cheaper in others, obviously, but it's going to be a lot of money regardless to get sewer moved to your site. So it's another thing you have to think about. Location, proximity to. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So one of the things you said, the sewer and public water. So will you ever look at a property that is septic and well, or is that just too far afield?
It's not, I wouldn't say that we won't look at it. The challenge with it is that you can't have two homes on one septic. You have to put each individual. So that means if you have a 150 unit asset, you're putting 150 septics in. Well, how much capacity can you do with 150 septic tanks? Can you do that feasibly?
Yeah, it probably cuts your yield in half, right?
It does. It does. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not something that you won't look at. And sometimes you can get lucky and you can go talk with the city and maybe they'll give you an abatement or they'll give a certain, tax credit to you by providing infrastructure if you put the sewer in. So, I mean, that goes back to what I was saying a minute ago when my mentor said, okay, you're going to call them. You're going to be the one that goes and does all this, because now you know what questions to ask. Now kind of, you're not afraid of them, because it can be intimidating. As you know, Ed, I mean, you look at something like this, it can be intimidating, but just calling down to the city and getting those reps in, it's massive. It's massive.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And learning by doing is the best way to learn in my book.
100%. I had a guy on LinkedIn tell me today he wanted to be a developer. I said, well, what's stopping you? Go do
exactly.
it. Just get after it.
Right.
Yeah.
I answer that question the exact same way. What is stopping you? Go. So you've had at least one mentor, and I'm pretty confident you've had more than one mentor. So I'm curious, beyond the just go do it, right, kind of advice, what's the best advice you've ever gotten, and who gave it to you? It
was actually a college professor that gave it to me. He told me that if 100 fish are going right, go left, because 100 fish won't have any food and you'll have all the food that grows.
Smart. Okay. I love that. Go where they eat. It's the old Walmart. It's the old Walmart model too, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. And so, as you've been learning this business, and you've been doing it for a while now, so you're probably teaching this business more than you're learning, but I'm curious, how do you, leaders are readers, right? And so, I'm curious how you take in information and incorporate that into your business, your world. And, what kind of, how do you do that? Is it audiobooks? Is it real book, actual books? Is it YouTube videos, podcasts, webinars, conferences, you name it, right? I'm curious, what's the way that you consume information, and frankly, who are you paying attention to these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm an average reader. I wouldn't say I'm a big reader. I'm an average reader. I'm not one to read stories or books that are like just about stories or fiction. If I'm going to read, I'm going to read to learn.
Right.
Makes sense.
Same.
So
same.
I read a lot of business books. I read a lot of real estate development books. I read a lot of psychology books. But one thing that I started learning to do, I actually told my father-in-law this the other day, and he took my advice. My father-in-law took my advice. I said, one thing I learned to do as I was in college again was to learn from other people's mistakes. So I'm a big individual to pay attention to what others do, to learn and listen to what they do and learn from their mistakes, so I don't make the same one. Who I pay attention to? I pay attention to a lot of the multifamily brokers. Bo Beery is one.
Yeah,
he's a friend of mine. He's a friend of mine. Great dude, great guy. I pay attention to him. I actually read his book twice a year. I just read it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so great.
An MM5 in Florida a few months ago, and
Jake and Gino's conference.
Yeah. And he fundamentally changed my mind about brokers, because I'm a marketing guy, right? So, I think, well, I can go find properties. I'll just market to the building owners. And, we were getting some traction, but he came in and blew me away and changed my mind, which is not easy to do. So I didn't mean to interrupt. So yeah.
No, you're fine.
The way who else are you paying attention to?
Bo Beery, Dustin Hendrickson. Let's see, who else do I pay attention to? Obviously Andy McMullen.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Pete Vanderveen, who's on our team with Legacy Acquisitions. Pete. He's just a brilliant mind. I mean, he's just so, I don't think of myself brilliantly. I'm just a dude. But, when I think of the people that I pay attention to, they're just brilliant in their simple thinking. Like they're not complex thinkers. They're just simple logic, and they're great at it.
It's actually a sign of high intelligence when you can boil, a fairly complex notion down to something that somebody like me or you can take in and understand and apply. Right? It's not easy to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I am not one to follow the big folks in real estate. Not that there's anything wrong or bad about them, but I'm just not one to follow the big players that are big marketing guys that are big, all about raising big capital and their big mentorship programs.
Right.
They're great programs. They are. I focus on people that really aesthetically fit what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
swim away from the school, right? That's it.
If 100 people are going that way, I'm going that way. Yeah. So that's just how I operate, man.
Yeah.
There's a few more that I follow. A lot of them, I just read their books. I'm a big fan of The Happiness Advantage.
Okay.
Sean Acor. I don't know if you've read his book, Sean Acor. It's a positive psychology book. And it's just, I try to keep that in my mind as well in all that I do, because this industry can be draining, as you know.
Again.
And but I try to just keep things into perspective, man.
Right.
These are just buildings and it's just money at the end of the day. And all of it will pass away one day.
And everything is replaceable as well. So
every bit of it.
I know multiple people who have, and in fact, I have a friend of mine who is a venture capitalist, and I know probably more than I can count number of people who have tried something, failed, tried it a different way and succeeded eventually. Right. Mm-hmm. And my friend, the VC guy, he says what he tells people is, I won't even work with you until I know he calls it cycling, until you've cycled once. And what that means is you created something, it failed miserably, you learned from it, and now you're back at the grind and trying to do something else. Because you learn so much from your failures and your mistakes. I don't actually, and I've talked about this with other guests, so I don't believe in mistakes. I believe in lessons, right?
Absolutely.
Right? It's an opportunity to learn. That's all it is. Everybody makes mistakes. There's only
100%.
There's only one being that I'm aware of who was perfect, and
Jesus Christ.
I am
Amen.
not that person. So
no. I believe, Ed, in two things. I believe that everyone deserves a good butt kicking at some point. You need one to kind of get you understanding the word. And I believe in mastering the understanding of the word no, and not using it as an emotion, but as an answer. That's it. Yep. Sometimes the answer is no, and we have to be okay with that.
Right.
You got to be.
Yeah.
And how you overcome that is really how greatness comes about.
Well, that's the sheer definition of resourcefulness, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So Tony, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you again for your time.
Likewise.
And your wisdom and your experience. If people want to learn more about COR13 or Legacy or you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? You
can email me. I can put my information in the chat. And you can post it up.
That's okay. We'll put it in the show notes.
Okay. And then LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. And really just call me. Shoot me a text. I'll put my phone number in there. I usually make myself available for people that want to learn.
For what you wish for,
I believe I agree. But I always end up learning more from people that I'm trying to teach something to than me teaching them anything.
Yeah, I agree. That's profound. So Tony Torres, COR13 Capital, thank you so much for your time today. I learned a lot, and I appreciate the education, and I'm sure our audience does as well. So I wish you continued success.
Thank you so much, Ed. Have an awesome day, man. Appreciate it.
You too. All right.